Hi there. This video is a conversation I had with Alma Bowden on some big topics. Um, the quality of my video is not very good due to being very small on the Skype, so I hope you'll forgive that. But here you go. Cheers.
Well, it's an ideal time for reflection, isn't it?
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first item is the nature of God and monism and monotheism. So monotheism
Mm.
is one God. Monism is not necessarily, monism can be religious or not. Shall I start with um, the quotes from that I got from Philosophy of Freedom?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that, Steiner said, monism derives the principles that it needs for the explanation of the world from human experience. It's basically saying, you know, monism obviously refers to one, and that one is part of what we are. All that is, there's not. I suppose the opposite of monism is dualism. We are here, and God is out there. Yep.
And if it's not religious, we are here, and absolute reality is something out there, outside of us.
Yes. Yeah.
So in other words, the absolute, whether it's godless or God, in dualism, there's an absolute distinction between me as a human being and God, or me as a human being and the absolute. That would be
Yep.
dualism.
The next quote, which is, to live in reality filled with the context of thought is at the same time to live in God. What I see with that is that we tend to often think that our thought um, is different from the world. And so
Indeed. Yeah.
monism is against that living in thought is part of the nature of intrinsic to reality. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to say anything else about that? To live in reality filled with the context of thought is at the same time to live in God. So,
Yeah, it is quite succinct. I mean, if you accept the first premise that the world is one,
mm-hmm.
and that what I experience as my immediate experience as a thinking individual, then that experience of my own thinking is by definition then connected to whatever the ultimate oneness is. And if the ultimate oneness is God, then thinking to be in thinking is to be with God.
Yeah.
But there could be a subtler link there, because why is he saying thinking and not another experience? Why isn't he saying feeling, or just a more general term, consciousness itself? Why is it particularly thinking? And so that would be a question which would revert to the entire thesis of the philosophy of freedom.
Yeah.
What is different about thinking?
Yeah.
So
So
maybe, I don't know if you want to say anything on that.
I don't think I'm ready for that one.
Me neither. Not at the moment.
Okay. So the third quote is, the God that is assumed through abstract inference is nothing but a human being transplanted into the beyond. I think that's a pretty common conception of God.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
the sense of God as a being rather than being.
Nice.
Yeah, and that, I was thinking with this first question that we were dealing with the conceptions of Steiner and of David Bentley Hart. Well, not specifically David Bentley Hart's, but he is someone that we've both read that talks about the classical theism. It's not his invention, but he's done a nice book explaining that, as again, God is as being rather than a being, and that I think it's also associated with the idea of creation. What do you call it? Ex nihilo, creation from nothing. That so what we experience, the entirety of what we experience in reality is grounded in God. So that is a yeah.
Yeah, Bentley Hart's very articulate. I found him very helpful in he's got his own way of articulating something, and there does seem to be an overlap with Steiner's concept of monism.
Yeah. And also in that he brings that idea of classical theism and basically shows how that is shared with sort of major thinkers in Christian, Hindu, and Judaism and Islam.
Yeah.
So I think we've nailed the nature of God.
So let's move on.
Let's move on. Yeah. So the next thing I was interested in is the threefold nature of man. And again, the body, soul, and spirit. And again, this is something that has come up both in sort of my investigations into Bentley Hart's roots and Gregory of Nyssa. He spoke of that distinction, and of course Steiner. Think about it, it continually challenges me, and I wonder if that's partly to do with the fact that it's not the standard way of thinking.
Yes.
Yeah. So we do tend to think, if we think it all as body and soul, rather than body, soul, and spirit. I might pass it to you now. How do you see that distinction?
Maybe a good starting point is Steiner felt it was absolutely imperative and essential to bring back the concept of the threefold. So bring back the concept that we are spirit as well as soul and body. And then if I combine that with the fact that Steiner spent so much energy on articulating a theory of knowledge and trying to ground knowledge and overcome the previously set ultimate limits to knowledge, which was the mainstream assumption, and maybe still is. I see these two things as being the same thing. So I see the concept of the human being as being spirit as well as body and soul, as being related to our epistemology, and changing our epistemology into whereby we can overcome the limits that are set, the limits of our knowledge that are set within the dualistic paradigm of body and soul. And so I interpret spirit as being that part of us which is connected to the universal and the absolute, whereas the concept of soul is private and the concept of body is mortality and passing.
Right.
And I think in our modern context, we are living in the epistemology that we are private minds in mortal bodies,
Yeah.
and that we can't ever connect to actual reality. We can't ever participate together in the unfolding of existence itself.
Yeah.
And I see the spirit as being the existence itself, ultimate nature of reality. And within each one of us, it manifests in a small way within our individual selves. And I interpret that as in our individual thinking,
Yeah.
just because that's what Steiner focuses his epistemology on so strongly.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, I mean, that's probably
That's good. So
good.
from that, the soul is, as you say, private. So it's to do with our percepts. Yeah. And
Exactly.
the spirit is the thinking, which is to do with the concepts, and the concepts are shared.
Yes,
And
they are
so,
public.
yeah,
They're universal.
yeah. So when you and I talk about a concept, the concept that we have is the same one, but when we apply it maybe to our perceptions, that's individual.
Exactly. Yeah, very well put. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, we've nailed that one.
We're motoring through it.
Nature
Brilliant.
and the purpose of imagination.
That seems to follow on quite nicely from what we're talking about, because imagination plays such a large role in our private percepts and our experience of the world that we're inhabiting.
Yeah. So I would say that we tend to think of imagination as to do with the imaginary, thinking about things that aren't real. But I think what the imagination is actually is it's what makes things real. So it's like when I'm thinking about you, for instance, you know, I know you've got eyebrows and eyes and various things, but until in my imagination I can make you as something of a living whole, I don't I don't really have you. I don't know you, you know. So knowing people, it's that active imagination that brings things to life within. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah,
And
perfect.
nature. I'm not sure why I paired nature with purpose of imagination. Obviously, in people like Wordsworth, nature and imagination were highly intertwined. I'm currently reading George MacDonald, and
Mm-hmm.
I think again it's possibly experiencing oneself, or you look at a sunset and you respond to it. That living within you is the imagination.
The last time we spoke, you said something I really liked. I thought it was absolutely spot on, because we were talking about how imagination can get it wrong, how we can be mistaken.
Yeah.
And you said that doesn't mean then that we stop doing imagination to know the world. The answer is that if your imagination gets something wrong, you're not using imagination properly. Do it better, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that what you said? What your
Yeah,
meaning?
that was what I said, but I'd forgotten, so thank you. Okay, shall we go on to the next one? Nature's laws.
Yes.
So nature's laws. There's two parts to this. Are these just descriptions of experience, and are they metaphors? Actually, I'll add another bit that I've got as sort of a separate heading, but I think it all merges together, and that is the language of science is still language. So I think what I was getting at with this is that we call things nature's laws, and because we call them laws, we give them a power over us that we don't realize that it's being given to them by ourselves. Again, I was talking about looking at a sunset. That's an experience, and we experience the beauty of the sunset, and we respond to it. But people could say, but what you're experiencing is just nature's laws. It's to do with the way the light hits your eyes, and the wind is to do with these physical laws. But all nature's laws are, as I say, it's a metaphor, and it's a way of describing experience in scientific language.
Yeah. That reminds me of that saying. I can't quite remember where it comes from. Man is the measure of all things.
Oh yeah.
And we forget that in a way, because you were talking about how we subject ourselves to these laws, and we put them above us, and we recognize a law out there, and we assume that that it has control over us, but we've overlooked the fact that we've measured it.
Yeah.
We are the ones measuring. We are the ones thinking the law.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it can't possibly be outside, above, in control of us when it comes to the actual thinking about it.
Yeah, we've produced it in our thinking.
Yeah. Thinking is the overarching umbrella. It's the meta reality above the law and us. So we're down here, and the law's above us and controlling us. But then we're connecting to thinking, which is able to encompass both in itself.
Yes. Whereas conventionally, currently, people tend to think that thinking is within these laws of nature.
That thinking is subject, as determined by laws of nature.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is taken to its logical conclusion is an absurdity, and it's self-contradictory for the reasons you say.
Yeah. What you've just said. Yeah. Okay. We're motoring through them. There was only one more after that, and that's a little one called all I've got for this is politics and religion. So I'm not sure how that comes out of it, but I think the obvious thing here is that politics and religion are the things that is often not considered polite to talk about. If you want to have an argument, then politics and religion is the place to go.
Well, come on, Kerry, let's have an argument.
But
like the rest of the internet.
I mean, I don't. I think we need to talk about politics and religion, but again, it's also quite interesting just thinking about the ways in which they tend to overlap. In the United States, for instance, religion is still quite powerful in the body politic, and it's generally more in the domain of the right. And there's a number of political beliefs that go around that. It's not that there isn't religion on the left. There is. But I suppose religion, all of that stuff that we've been talking about so far, is within the language, the domain and language of religion. Yeah.
Do you think that? I'm not sure. I see that. I would say, to my sense, it's within the domain of philosophy, but
Yeah.
maybe philosophy is within the domain of religion. Maybe you can enlighten me on that.
Um, well, religion's a bit of a difficult one, really. I mean, Plato was a philosopher. Yeah, he's generally regarded as a philosopher, and yet his thinking has been sucked up into theology.
Mm.
And really, philosophers in that time weren't thinkers that separated their thinking out from theology, or theistic concerns.
Right. Maybe that first happens with Descartes, although where he really separates himself, but then comes back to God as a sort of
But I think you're right
way out.
that the modernism, the scientific revolution, basically probably the 17th century, and about then the Renaissance. The Renaissance sort of I see as kind of a late Middle Ages, and the 17th century is the birth of secularism, and that's when you start to get philosophers that are seen as distinct from theologians, really. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? The word religion. It's got a whole lot of connotations, so we think of practice and so forth. Religious thinkers grappled with what is experience, very basic concepts, or how we experience the world and so forth, was 17th century, or dealt with by religious thinking. And again, they didn't have those two separate realms of religion and secularity that we seem to have in the way that we do. Yeah.
I find Steiner's his lecture series, The Redemption of Thinking. I've mentioned that one before. I think to you
have.
The Redemption of Thinking, and he goes from Plato, and then focuses a lot on the scholastics, Thomas Aquinas, and he notices that in that medieval period, theological and philosophical grappling was trying to understand, or it came up against a limit between how the individual can participate with the divine. They tried to know as much as they could of God and found that there were limits.
Oh, yes.
And this was an expression, Steiner was pointing out, this was an expression of thinking separating itself from the world.
Right.
And it took a religious form in realizing that that thinking doesn't feel like it can participate with God. And then the focus shifted with the scientific revolution to the materiality of the world, and then it came to a polar limitation with the Dubois-Reymond, saying that we're ignoramus. We're ignorant to the actual. There's a limitation to what we can know of absolute reality with respect to the physical. And then Steiner introduces anthroposophical thought as a bridge, not only to understanding the overcoming the limits to understanding the material world, but also as overcoming the limits in participating with the divine. No,
Kant has that same sense of limits, and Goethe does not. So
exactly.
uh,
And
Goethe,
Goethe was uneasy with the religion that was around him, as well as
yes,
the scientific,
yes,
orthodox scientific
yes,
paradigms. So Goethe really fell between those two polarities,
yes,
and didn't recognize them as being legitimate, really.
yeah. So Goethe didn't create a epistemology, um, but I think looking at Goethe, we can say that he works in a monistic paradigm.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah,
You know, the thought that arises in him of the plant is the same natural process as the plant itself. Isn't, and
exactly,
it's a revolution in thought that hopefully is still happening.
absolutely,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, absolutely. It is a revolution in thought, or yeah, or as maybe Steiner would say, a redemption of thinking.
yes. I don't know if you want to say anything about politics.
I've heard somebody put it nicely. They said culture is upstream from politics. So what happens in culture ends up being expressed in politics.
Mm-hmm.
But the political expression presupposes a cultural
Yeah,
one. So if there's political change, according to this view, there has first had to become a cultural change.
yeah,
And then this person pointed out upstream from culture is philosophy.
mm,
So a cultural change doesn't happen without a philosophical change.
yeah.
And so I
So,
find myself, politics is something which is very engaging and very sensational, but I always find myself needing to go back to first principles,
mm,
or whatever's happening in the politics is always pointing to first principles.
yeah.
Uh, and
It it's
yeah,
as it's
that's
as
my feeling.
though it's as though you can't resolve political issues in their own terms,
That seems, yeah, that's
right?
the conclusion I see as unavoidable.
Like Plato's cave, the politics is the shadows on the wall, uh,
Yeah, yeah,
and uh,
yeah, I'll go with that.
that are cast by the kind of thinking that we do and the kind of culture that we have.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
brilliant. Yeah, yeah, I would definitely.
Okay. Um,
That's my feeling on that.
okay. That's covered the subjects that I wanted to discuss. Thank you. A good time for reflection, as I said, now that we're um, self isolating. Uh,
Yeah, so
I actually think that's quite an interesting idea. One thing we haven't talked about is going from um, the communal to the individual. Theism was expressed and experienced, I think, communally, and
exactly,
it's now expressed individually, and
absolutely.
now we're all being pushed to isolate one ourselves, and a
It's
great time for reflection on the
yeah.
self, I think.
If you think of Barfield's how Barfield talks about alienation,
Yes.
and he describes the characteristics. This, I mean, we look at the language of self-isolation and social distancing, and
Mm-hmm.
it's basically a physical, worldly manifestation of the consciousness soul crisis,
Yeah.
as you put it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a good that's an interesting observation, definitely.
Okay. Well, thank you, and
Thanks, Kerry.
goodbye.
That was enjoyable.
Cheers.
See you next
I
time.
enjoyed it too. Cheers. Bye.